Well, here's the headline for this morning. God designed us to be eccentric. That is not an excuse to be weird for Jesus. I can't be doing. But he designed us to be eccentric, and that he designed us to be off-center, to not have our center on ourselves, but to have it placed slightly off-center, on something other than ourselves. Now, the very natural way to be is to have ourselves at the center, isn't it? You know, it starts when we're a baby, and all we think about is our own needs. Very understandably so, but when a baby cries for milk, it's very me, 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 isn't it? You know. The danger is that when we grow up, we stay like that, and we stay me, me, me. Some people grow up and don't understand this principle, that actually life is best lived when we're off-center. It means that we move ourselves slightly to one side, that we have capacity to see the needs of others, and in serving those needs, we find meaning to our own lives. I read a great little book this summer by a guy called Stephen Cottrell, and it's called Do Nothing to Change Your Life. What a gorgeously inviting, lazy title that is. And he writes, in the very grand scheme of things, people can best understand and appreciate their own position when they place themselves off-center, part of something of which they are intricately and preciously a part, but which does not have them at the center. That sounds like Christian community to me. I watched some great footage recently of a softball game in the States. I don't watch a lot of softball, but I was recommended this little clip, and it's brilliant. It's about a woman who is on this particular team, and it's a college game, and it's for the championship, so it really, really counts. And she starts to play, and she hits her first ever home run, so she basically hits it right out of the park. And then she's got to run around all the bases. But in her excitement, she realizes she's run past base one and hasn't actually touched it, which means it hasn't counted. So she quickly turns around to go to run back, totally twists her knee, falls to the ground, can't even walk. And everyone's like, oh, she was totally going to get around them all. She'd hit it right out the park. What was she going to do? They went to speak to the umpire. Well, if any of her teammates even touch her, she's totally disqualified. So everyone was like, oh, it's so disappointing. What are they going to do? And then two athletes from the opposing team come to the umpire and say, well, is it allowed if we carry her around? And he was a bit shocked, but he said, well, there's nothing in the rules to say that you can't. So two athletes from the opposing team pick up this woman, and they carry her and her very sore leg around each of the bases, and they touch her foot on each base. So she has officially made it round all the bases, and they take her back to her teammates. And those two athletes said they were shocked because they thought there might be a little ripple of applause or something. But they said as they looked up, the whole of the crowd was in floods of tears. Because you know what? There's something in each of us, isn't there, that resonates with. It goes to our very soul that, you know what? Even though we naturally clutch for ourselves and want to push ourselves forwards, actually we know deep down in ourselves that God made us to be off-center. God made us to put others first. God made us to be part of something bigger. That's why those athletes did that day, because something deep in them knows that. That's why those people watching were in tears. That's why I was blubbing watching the footage, because it's a beautiful thing when we just put ourselves to one side and we put someone else first. If we think that Christian fellowship is about nice cups of tea together or inviting someone for Sunday lunch, it's so much more than that. It challenges so much of today's society. The way that we're asked to live here from Paul, the way that Jesus asked us to live, goes completely against the me first of pushing ourselves forward in this society. It goes against a lot of the look at me of social media. It goes against all those things. And deep down in us, we know that this countercultural way to live when we are not at the center of our own lives, is actually the way God made us to be. That's why Paul is at pains to describe it here. The Greek word for fellowship comes from a root meaning common or shared. So fellowship means common participation in something that either you're giving something, what someone else needs, or you're receiving something that someone else has given. Give and take is the essence of fellowship. So when you turn up to church, or you serve on a team, or you go to your life group, it's not just about what you receive from being there, but it's about what other people receive because of the contribution that you make. Or when we're not in church, or we don't make it to our life group, or we don't serve on a team, it's not just about what we miss out on, it's totally about what everyone else in the family misses out on, because our contribution is not there that day. Fellowship is give and take. It's why we deliberately planned a church weekend away for this term. It's not just for a bit of fun. This is really planned because we believe it's a chance for us to say, hey, I'm in. I'm not just choosing Jesus. I recognize that I'm choosing this bunch of people, the rest of these Jesus followers in this place to walk with as well, and I'm committed to you guys. We're committed to each other. So firstly, God knows that we find most meaning in our lives when we live off-center, and that's why he asks us to live this way, and why Paul describes it for us here. Secondly, we make most development in our character when we live in community. This passage comes after Paul has been reminding the Colossians earlier in chapter 3 how their lives should have changed. He's saying that once you were dead and now you're alive, the whole letter is basically replying to a heresy that's happened. People are saying, oh, you don't just need Jesus. You need a whole lot more. You need this as well and this as well. And Paul writes this letter to the Colossians to say, Jesus is enough. Jesus is everything. Don't add anything else to it. And then he says here, just before this passage, he says, look, you were once dead, now you're alive. Now this is the way you're supposed to live. And this is the description of how that new community is meant to be. It's been said that one can acquire everything in solitude except character. So look at some of the characteristics that Paul lists in this passage: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, love. Most of those attributes are things that they're only possible when we live in community. So he tells us to have compassion. But how are we going to have compassion unless there's an object for our compassion? He tells us to live in humility towards one another. That means having a right view of ourselves towards God and other people. Again, we need other people to live in that way. He tells us to forgive whatever grievances are between us. How are we going to do that unless there's another person to forgive? The assumption for Paul writing this is clearly that followers of Jesus will be doing life together. And the list goes on. All the beautiful attributes that he lists. The instructions we're given are about how we relate to and interact with each other. And God gives us this group of fellow believers as a gift so that we can work out these character traits, these attributes in our own lives. God has been very strategic here. He's thought this stuff through. We know God accepts us exactly how we are, don't we? He loves us so much, we can come to him no matter what state we're in, and I'm so thankful of that. But we also know that he loves us too much to leave us that way. His desire is to change us bit by bit, ultimately to be like Jesus. And what's the way he's chosen to do that? Primarily, it's through each other. Bumping along with other Christians is like a workshop. It's like the practical part of the assignment. It's where we work all this stuff out, and it's how we're shaped and changed. God has always had a people, hasn't he, if you think about it? The Old Testament is the story of God's people, not just a person. And it's how they followed God as a group. And the New Testament is about a new group of people who follow Jesus. And now it's our turn. And our story is to find a way to live our lives as a group together, following Jesus. There's a great story called Hamilton's Hats. I wonder if anyone knows this. It's about a little pig who loves hats. Bear with. Hamilton loves to stand in front of the mirror and try on all his various different hats. And his mum says to him, Hamilton, you've got a lot of lessons to learn in life, and you will not learn any of them through hats. Hamilton goes out for a walk with his chosen hat for the day, and he comes across a giraffe. And the giraffe likes the look of Hamilton's hat, and he takes it off Hamilton, he puts it on his own head. And Hamilton says, I want my hat back. And the giraffe says, you're going to have to climb up my long, long neck to get it. And Hamilton looks up. I'm going to have to be very brave, he thinks, and he climbs up. And he gets all the way to the top, and he gets his hat back. Phew. Next one he meets is a band of monkeys, and the monkeys take the hat off, and they play catch with it. And Hamilton says, I want my hat back. And they say, well, you're going to have to be very patient. And eventually, the monkeys stop playing catch with his hat, and he has the hat back. And finally, he meets a little mouse, a very cold, wet little mouse. And the little mouse looks at the lovely hat that Hamilton's wearing, and he says, oh, that looks like just the thing to curl up in and have as my home. And Hamilton says, you want me to give you my hat for your home? Oh, I couldn't ask you to be so kind as to do that, could I? Hamilton shows great kindness and gives his hat to the mouse. Hamilton's mum was right. He didn't learn his lessons in life through hats, but he learned an awful lot through his interaction with others. With the people he met along the way, he learned to be brave. He learned to be patient. He learned to be kind. God has given us all these other people so that we can learn these lessons, so that we can learn to be humble, so that we can learn to forgive, so that we can learn to show compassion. That's how he's done it. That's what we're here for. To rub off each other's rough edges. We'll meet one person and we might just need a bit of patience. In another situation we come across in church, we might just need to learn some humility. This is how he's designed it. This is how he develops our character. God knows that we don't learn this stuff so well in a vacuum. Now, yes, time alone with the Lord for each of us is absolutely crucial, and we should all have that as part of the rhythm of our lives. Absolutely. There's stuff that God can whisper to us in those moments that we don't hear in a crowded church. But in terms of character development, God wants to use the rest of us to knock off the rough edges and make us how he wants us to be. Archbishop Desmond Tutu on this subject is so gorgeous. Absolutely lovely. He talks about the African spirit of Ubuntu. It's clearly not pronounced Ubuntu, but we'll go with that this morning because I can't say it how he says it. And he describes it like this. A person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole. It is to say, my humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. We belong in a bundle of life. The profound truth is you cannot be human on your own. We are made for this delicate network of interdependence. We make most development in our character when we are right in the mix with other people who follow Jesus as well, who might be completely different to us in other ways, but we share this one thing. And God wants us to use each other to shape us to be like him. And finally, what are the spiritual principles going on here? We make most impact on those around us when we give them something to notice. It seems like it's about us, doesn't it? It seems that fellowship is us receiving something because we're being shaped, or someone else receiving something because they're being shaped. But it's not simply about that. It's about God giving an opportunity for the rest of his world to see his characteristics at work in us and be drawn to him simply by the way we treat each other. It's part of his plan. Let's not miss it. This is part of his plan. Jesus taught his disciples about it, didn't he? He said, let your light shine before others so they may see your good deeds and what? And praise your Father in heaven. And at the Last Supper, he asked his disciples this one thing. He says, please, as I have loved you, would you love one another? He said, this is how they'll know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. So when we live in this way, it's not just about us. It's not just about the other Christian who is helped. It is about a watching world and how they see Jesus' characteristics in the way that we live. He's not walking the earth anymore, but we are. And we're to live out his characteristics that Paul lists here in the way we treat each other, and it's how other people are going to see him. So what are some of the barriers to fellowship for you? Have a think about it. There's busyness, isn't there? You know, busy lives means committing to coming to church or to life group or to serving on a team is one extra thing in our week. It might be that that's something that stops you. Have a think about that. There's hurt, isn't there? Maybe if we've been hurt before in Christian community, then it's harder to get involved and to trust again. That might be your story. It might be that we just don't feel we fit in for whatever reason. It might be that just naturally we're more of an independent spirit and we kind of like to do life on our own. Think about what some of those barriers to fellowship might be for you. But I would simply urge you this morning, please don't let any of those things be bigger to you than Jesus' plea to you this morning, as it was at the Last Supper. As I have loved you, please love one another. Because that is how they're going to see that you're my disciples. We're going to share communion together in a short while. And we're going to use it this morning as our response to this challenge, to this passage. You know, we come up and we receive the bread and wine, and it's a very special thing. But it's not just about what we receive individually. This morning, we really want to take the opportunity to think about this is us as a body receiving Jesus' blood and body together. And we all sort of come and we queue up, and the children come in, and we're family together. So it might be this morning that as you receive communion, you want to make a recommitment. You might want to say, actually, you know what, I probably have been living in a quite self-centered way, and I want to move myself to the side. I want to look to God at the center. I want to have room for other people. You might want to use that as your recommitment as you receive communion this morning. Go on, you know you want to be eccentric. It might be that you just need to be open to your character being shaped through others. You could be committed to that. It might be that this morning you feel compelled to live differently purely so the world can see Jesus in you. Whatever it is, whatever you feel prompted to in the next couple of minutes, you receive communion and you recommit yourself